Welcome to the Hunt Backcountry Podcast. This is episode number 428, and today we're sharing a story from the recent archery elk season. Graydon is a listener of the show, and he was able to go on his very first elk hunt this year, and he was able to take the entire month of September off to hunt elk in Colorado. And with weeks of elk hunting opportunity, you would think that he would hear some bugles, have some crazy encounters, be able to cover some country and get into elk. And Graydon hunted hard. You'll hear about it. He covered country in multiple units, but he did not experience what you would expect. He did kill an elk, which I'm excited for you to hear about, but I'm also a bit dumbfounded by some of his experiences and the big picture of this story. I don't know what to make of it. I would be curious to think more on this and hear your take and hear if other listeners have had similar experiences. But before we dive into that story, I just want to remind you guys, you can always contact us directly, share any questions, suggestions, or maybe even guest suggestions that you have for this show. Just send an email to podcast@exomountaingear.com. And finally, if you're enjoying the show, it would help us tremendously if you just share it with a friend or leave a rating or review in your podcast app. Hit pause and do that right now if you can. Come on back, let's dive into this wild story with Graydon. Graydon, welcome to the podcast. I'm excited to chat with you today and hear your story and learn from you and all that stuff. I got to ask first, one thing that caught me in your email is it sounded like you essentially had, unless I read it wrong, essentially had almost the whole month of September to be out of state hunting elk. Is that true? And if so, how?
That is absolutely correct. And I'm a contractor where I work. So I basically had to take a month off or they were going to tax on my per diem money. So
Okay.
I think I might have to stick around this place. So I get all these Septembers to hunt.
Yeah. How cool, man. Dude, that's huge, especially, you being out of state. And that's one thing, it can be tough if you are traveling for a hunt, is you obviously typically you're picking dates in advance, and sometimes weather and other factors don't cooperate. So if you're able to have a whole bunch of time to work with, then that obviously increases not only your odds because you have more time in the field, but just gives you chances to use the best of certain good days and maybe take it easy on some bad days and things like that.
Yeah, it really worked out perfectly.
Yeah.
Definitely the move in the future.
Yeah. I know this was your first successful archery elk hunt, right?
Yes.
This was your first elk hunt period though? Is that correct?
That's right.
Okay.
First
So
time
dude,
ever facing them.
you took off that's an adventurous way to get after it. Not only am I going to go on my first elk hunt, I'm only going to do it driving across the country, and I'm only going to do it solo, but then I have a month to do it. That's wild.
Yeah, it worked out perfectly.
Man, there's so much to talk about. You were successful, but it took a while.
Yeah, I think it was around 3 weeks.
Yeah. How did you manage all that time in being so low? And I'm curious, just even practically, how much time were you in the field versus head into town to take a break? And from a very big picture, before we dive into details of the hunt, I'm just curious on the logistics of that and spending that much time out there solo, and from a big picture, how you used that time.
Yeah, so most days I wasn't really waking up early, I guess classical elk hunting would dictate. I would just kind of wake up around when the sun came up and just try to figure out what I wanted to do from there. And another thing, I did have a coworker and his brother. They were out there for, I guess, a little bit over a week. So it wasn't totally solo, but the beginning week and the end was solo.
Okay.
Yeah, so that was nice to break it up, hang out with my buddy.
Yeah. And then you camped a lot at your truck, right?
Yes. So it was really funny. I anticipated basically backpacking and sleeping out of my tent, But just as it happens, I actually never slept out of a tent because the elk never gave me a reason to.
What do you mean by that? Elaborate.
So if I got into elk, I was like, cool, I have camp on my back. I can just kind of settle down and not hike extra miles. But I only got into elk one day. So all those other days, I'm like, all right, I'm going to hike back to the truck and stay mobile and go somewhere else.
So how many this was I don't know if we said this yet. This was Colorado.
Yes,
Obviously with Colorado, you have an if you have an over the counter tag, which I think you did, right?
sure did.
Yeah. So you can hunt a variety of units by holding this one over the counter archery elk tag. About how many units did you hunt?
So I think it was four.
Four. Okay. So you
Yeah, I was
did
trying to blow through them, but yeah, actually, after I found success, if I didn't find success that day, I was going to go to a different unit.
did you stay in the same vicinity of the state, or did you like go, man, I'm in the southwest, I'm gonna go north central or something crazy like that?
Yeah, it was about the same cluster of units. They were kind of like in a pocket, and the next unit was actually going to be, I don't know, I guess kind of significantly wester of where I was.
Mm, okay. So 3 weeks, and you said you got into elk one day.
Yes, and it was only one elk.
So
I've never heard a bugle.
you never heard a bugle the whole time?
I never heard a single elk sound, and I saw one elk.
Of those 3 weeks, how many days did you hunt?
It was pretty much every day. I
Okay.
think maybe 1 or 2 days we kind of got rained out. So I would just like go into town and get a shower and try to regain my sanity. But in some capacity, every one of the other days I was hunting.
Wow. Okay. Di- so we talk about, being persistent, staying patient, not, getting down when animal activity isn't fantastic, whatever. That's typically in the context of people hunting 5, 7, 10 days. To be getting into 3 weeks of hunting almost every day, not having an encounter, not hearing a bugle. How did you deal with that mentally, man?
It was a grind. I don't know. I was just really trying to stay positive.
Yeah.
And I guess ultimately it worked out because I don't think I ever got really too down. But yeah, it was a grind.
Yeah, that's impressive to not get down. I, one thing with elk hunting and archery elk hunting in particular is you learn from encounters, right? And I'm not saying you can't learn things if you don't have an encounter, but so often with archery elk, it can take multiple encounters to actually get a shot or fill your tag. And there's just those times when it's like you have this encounter and maybe you realize your setup was wrong or you moved at the wrong time or you were too aggressive or not aggressive enough or you cow called when you should have buged. Like there's all these things that you can like assess after an encounter and do like an after action report and look at, okay, I just had this encounter with elk. I did X, maybe I should have done Y, etc. And learning from those experiences and encounters that don't lead to killing an elk. I'm curious though, over multiple weeks of hunting, but not necessarily having encounters throughout that process, like what were you learning?
I learned a lot of places that the elk aren't, but were at some point. So it was kind of cool because all my e-scouting places, like I would find old sign and I'd be like, all right, well, I was kind of spot on with this, but they're not here now. It would be like they probably left a week ago. So it was really interesting trying to just be a detective and be like, well, where did they go? Where are they now?
Hmm. When
And
you
I don't think I've
say,
quite figured that out on most of these places.
yeah, so you think sign that obviously wasn't fresh, but you don't think it was like months old, do you think it was potentially a week or 2 weeks or something like that?
Yeah, so I'm not really great at judging sign, but
Hmm.
just from what I was able to gather, I was like, it seems like this sign is as old as, say, opening day.
Okay.
Once the pressure rolled in, they moved elsewhere.
Mm. And you said you still feel like you don't have a clear answer until, and of course, you're bouncing around different units, different contexts. So there's no one answer to this period. But I guess if you think about it now and you go, okay, like here's a spot where I felt like I was on a week old sign, or maybe elk moved semi recently because of hunting pressure. What are some of the things you think you would look for to locate elk when there is hunting pressure, if that makes sense?
Hmm. Honestly, it almost feels like finding a needle in a haystack because there's so much land out there, and you're like,
Yeah.
did they move to private off of the border of the forest, or are they just hiding in a like a hellhole?
Hmm.
I don't know. Some of these questions that I had, I never did get answers to because
Yeah.
I just wasn't willing to put in the time and stay in a unit when I had like 40 something others to check out.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we talk a lot, obviously, about staying mobile and finding elk and moving till you do find elk. But there is, there can be something to be said for not necessarily staying put, but like staying in a vicinity to go, okay, I know elk aren't here. I've checked that box, but are they here? Are they over this ridge? Are they in this different basin? Have they dropped lower? Did they go to this pocket? And maybe not vacating the country but just covering that country differently or more thoroughly or giving it a few days. And I'm not saying it's the wrong answer to pick up and move to a new spot. There's different ways to hunt country. There's different ways to hunt elk. And obviously if you want to just be very active and cover country till you find vocal elk, for example, then you're more prone to being more mobile and less patient, or like maybe not picking apart an area, because you're not necessarily looking at sign or trying to piece together the whole puzzle. You're just trying to go find vocal elk, for example. And I think you can have success both ways. They're just very different strategies and approaches.
Oh, absolutely. I was just trying to find my niche too.
Yeah.
But yeah, when I would check out an area, like I wouldn't just like go in and do a loop and completely go somewhere else. Like I would, like, yeah, the close vicinity, I would do a loop here, do a loop there, check the other drainage or check
Hmm.
another elevation. But yeah, every time it pretty much was the same result.
What was your approach to calling, maybe initially, and then did that change over the course of these weeks, or did it not change? Like maybe you just stuck to a certain like approach or strategy or idea in terms of calling while you're covering ground.
So if I was like hiking a ridge top or something, I would do a locator down in and give it a little bit and then walk some more, do it, try it again. I did a lot of cold calling setups to, I believe they were pretty good setups. Like it was nice and thick and timbered where I was, but I would probably do a 30-minute to 45-minute cold calling set. Nothing came in. I would hike a little bit more, try it again. And sometimes I would even just stomp around the woods just looking for sign or visuals or hear something. And I would just cow call about every minute or so, just stomping, like breaking branches and stuff, trying to sound like a cow, just running around.
So I know you said you didn't hear bugles, you didn't have like an encounter, but during the course of that, did you bump elk? Did you smell elk? Like any of that type of experience?
None of the above. Like I
Man,
was pretty surprised. Like I was like, being out here this long, you would think I would have ran into one and blew it out of a area or something.
yeah, that's wild, man.
So I think really what happened, like I guess long story short, the taxidermist told me it was a long, hard winter. And she was like, you should have bought a lottery ticket because there's just not a lot of elk to be seen. Like, for example, one of the ranches out by the taxidermist, the guy found like 1,000 dead elk on his property.
Whoa.
So I didn't realize, I knew they had a hard winter, but I didn't realize how grave it was.
Wow.
So I'm thinking that probably had a lot to do with it.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I didn't archery elk hunt this year. I knew that I wasn't archery elk hunting this year, so I didn't look at different things as closely as I normally do. And I've heard things about the winter, but in terms of their impact or how it affected certain areas, I just am not as up to date on this year as I am on a typical year. So that's pretty wild.
Yeah, and it seems that the, I guess the area that I was in got hit especially hard,
Hmm.
northern Colorado. And apparently it bled into other states too, like Utah and Wyoming, parts of that, they got hit pretty hard too.
Yeah.
So the more you know. Wish I
Yeah.
knew that going into it.
What was your experience encountering other hunters or your perception of hunting pressure? And I guess, tied to that is what patterns did you see or did you see it change much? Did you notice more on the weekends? Did it matter? Was there, you covered units, was certain units or certain types of country more pressured than others? I mean, there's a lot there that we could talk about, but I guess I just want to hear your experience on encountering other hunters and your perception of hunting pressure.
So I only saw a few other hunters in the woods, like while I was actively hunting, which I was really surprised by. But I would see a lot of cars parked. I talked to a lot of people, and especially on weekends, and especially during muzzy season, there was just people all over the place. But even during that, I only saw a few people just actually while I was hunting.
And I guess as you run into hunters, you're hearing them talk about their experience being similar to yours of, man, we can't seem to turn up an elk, not hear an elk, etc. Or did you talk to anyone who did hear bugles and whatnot?
So I talked to dozens of people during that entire time, and a vast majority, probably 95% of them are like, yeah, we haven't seen anything. We haven't seen sign. We haven't heard anything. And then there was a couple people that saw elk, and those same couple of people did kill elk too. I think it was probably three people that I talked to that had found and killed elk.
Hmm. Was that, were those three people in a similar area or unit? Like, was there a quote unquote good spot, or were those three separate encounters in three separate areas, in different units?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was three separate units.
Okay. Hmm. Man, you, I'm just curious, like, to go back to it. So you essentially spent the first week by yourself, it sounds like. And was that the very first like opening week of season?
So I think I got to Colorado on the 5th, hunted
Oh, okay.
because one of my buddies decided to get married on like September 4th or something. So I'm like, oh man, I'm gonna miss the opener. But doesn't seem like I missed much with the opener, to be honest.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking through a timeline of like, okay, you get out there, it's early in the season, and sometimes it's, it can be quieter earlier, warmer, what have you. So in my head, just thinking through this big picture of several weeks, it's like, all right, you got the first week, you don't get into anything, but it's easy to chalk that off to, oh, they're not fired up yet, or it was too warm, or whatever. And then rough timeline, you have this second week where buddies come in. So then you spend a week with them and you didn't have encounters or success, but at least you had the camaraderie and like support and encouragement of being with someone versus it being another week solo with no action. And then they leave, and then it's like, all right, well, now here I am again. It's the third week, but I can stick this out and do it. So I think just like a logical to me mindset of like, all right, first week is easier to justify. It's early, they're not fired up yet. Second year, you're probably kind of like encouraged, rejuvenated by having some company. And then the third week, you're probably somewhat thinking like, all right, they're gonna get fired up. Like, I just got to stick with this. Does that translate? Did that kind of Was that at all going through your mind, that type of thought?
Yeah, that was very true. Everything you said there. But yeah, I'm every day, every day closer to the second half of September. I'm like, they got to start talking.
Right.
Like, I don't think they can control whether they start talking or not if it's rutting elk.
Yeah.
Crazy.
Did you go into any spots that were just a total wasteland, like no sign, no nothing? And then,
Oh yeah.
yeah, okay.
Only one. It was a wilderness area.
Hmm.
So that probably had a lot to do with it. Really
Mm-hmm.
beautiful country. I loved it out there, but just did a loop through there, and there was a lot of deadfall too. I don't think
Yeah.
elk particularly want to live in that type of stuff,
Mm-hmm.
but it was a cool area. Just didn't stir up any sign.
And then would you say that a lot of the other, I guess what I'm getting at, did you see a lot of variety in like certain pockets like this one where it was a wasteland versus others that had a ton of sign, or was it kind of a lot of very similar, like call it mediocre, like, hey, there's some sign in here, there's some potential, but it's all older? Or did you, I guess, just see a lot of variety and kind of know like this was either really good, but just not right now, or this was really bad and a little bit in between? Or was it a lot of like similar type impression? Because you just covered so much ground in so many days. I'm just curious, like some of your takeaways on that type of thing.
A lot of the places that I found sign, it was really good sign. Like I was like, there was a good amount of elk here. They're just not here anymore.
Yeah.
That was most of them. Some of them, you'd be like, oh yeah, they might have had an elk pass through or something, but a lot of it was like, no, they were living here at one point.
I still, man, I don't, that is wild to me to spend that many days in cover country and just not find fresh sign, not hear a bugle, not bump something. Like that is just wild. I've certainly had multiple days of elk hunting like that, but I can't imagine having 3 weeks like that.
Yeah, I was like, I guess I'm just gonna chalk this up to Colorado. But
Yeah.
looking back, I don't know what I chalked it up to.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was wild. Still.
All right, well, let's slow down. I know we've bounced all over. I just had so many questions on it's such a unique experience, I think, that you had, like this opportunity to be new, to spend so much time, et cetera, et cetera. But let's go ahead and dive into, I want to say the day that you were successful, but also if there was anything kind of leading up to that and the days prior. Like I want to begin to pick apart the actual what became your successful hunting story and kind of slow down and yeah, just hear how that came together and what you hope what you think contributed to it and different things like that. So pick up the story wherever you think it makes the most sense for that.
Okay, so the day before I found success, we did a basically just hiked the ridge top because at the bottom of this little drainage, like right off the side of the highway, we found some actually found some fresh sign. We're like, all right, these elk got to be coming down here to feed, probably at night. So we're like, all right, we'll try to find where they're bedding during the day. And we did a big loop, and I was pretty banged up after the after that day. We didn't end up finding much of anything, but so I was banged up. And then the next day, I start my hunt. I hunted alone. That was the first day I hunted alone from my buddies. They went home, but so I was like, all right, I'm gonna try the opposite side back in basically an area that I already hunted a few days, but I'm like, I just want to try something different, and I haven't been on this ridge yet. So I hike up and I spent most of the day pretty much at a pretty high altitude, and I didn't find much sign really at all. So as it getting closer to the evening, I start hiking back down the ridge towards the truck, and I still had the thermal coming up. So I'm like, yeah, I'll still do some cow calls every once in a while I'm hiking around, getting back to the truck. And I stopped, cow called, and then I pulled my phone out. I was gonna look at the map just to make sure I was going the right spot. And I look up and there's a bull 30 yards away from me. It was the most sudden thing I've ever experienced. It just completely out of nowhere. It's like, oh my, I'm into elk.
Yeah.
And so I guess all my whitetail experience kicked in and I just froze because he was looking right at me. And I probably had a staring match with him for probably 5 minutes, but it sure felt like 10 at the time. And I couldn't move. I had my bow in my off hand, my phone in my bow hand. I had no arrow knocked. I didn't have my release clicked on. I'm like, all right, a lot has to go right now for me to actually get this opportunity off. So he ends up starting to move side hill, like right below me. And he walks through a patch of trees. It was like really thin pines. So there wasn't much of any sizable trees around. But I was able to switch my bow around, put my phone away, knock an arrow, get my release on. And I'm looking, I'm like, there's only one shooting lane, like exactly one shooting lane in this whole area that I can see. And he just meanders right into it. But I had time to range in that opening, and I ranged 30 yards. So this bull actually gets into my shooting lane. I planned on giving him a nervous grunt, which I practiced probably thousands of times. Like I know I had it in the bag to get him to stop. But I guess my mouth and the reed went dry, like during all this excitement. And I tried to do the nervous grunt, and the most horrible, twisted whistle comes out of this reed. It was absolutely horrible and worst case scenario, but ultimately it got him to stop. And I was already at full draw at that point. So as my shot broke, one of the last things I remember is like, hmm, this elk looks smaller than 30 yards. And as I watched that arrow go down, I was like, oh no, I just missed. Thought I missed below him. So he kind of bounds off 20 yards or so. And I'm like, all right, maybe I can call him back in with get work on his curiosity or something. So I cow called a couple times and I think I took a step to basically peer over a little bit. And then he bounds off out of sight down the ridge. So I'm like, oh, well, that sucks. So a few minutes later, I walk over. Oh, so I actually saw my arrow stuck in a piece of deadfall, which was incredibly convenient because I didn't think I'd ever see that arrow again. When I get to the arrow, I'm like, oh, there's blood on it. This is either really good or really bad, but I have a bad feeling about it. So let's investigate further. But yeah, the arrow was, I'm not going to say covered in blood, but there was decent blood on it, which is really a good thing because I don't think I would have looked that hard if I didn't find the arrow because I was so unbelievably certain that I had missed. So after that, yeah, I kind of hiked back up the ridge, did a big loop around to not disturb the area, and hiked back to the truck because I wasn't very confident in the shot. So I'm like, this guy's going to sit overnight. And I'll find him in the morning.
So how late was it at that point?
It was probably 20 minutes before dark ish.
Okay.
I think it
Yeah.
was just about dark when I got to the truck.
Yeah. And so before you found the arrow, you saw him bound off kind of after you know, he shuffled a bit after the shot and then you saw him bound off a second time, right?
Yeah.
And at that point in time, you didn't see him like looking hurt, looking wobbly, any blood on him, etc. So like up until the point you found your arrow, you thought it was a clean miss.
I was so unbelievably certain. But yeah, so thick in there, I couldn't really see him. I just saw a blurry figure of an elk running through the thickness of this pine stuff.
Yeah. What did you, based on your experience hunting whitetail, what did you make of the blood on the arrow? Like, did you read much into it? Did you look at, oh, it's lighter, darker, it's bubbly, you mentioned it, you said
it wasn't fully covered in blood, but had pretty good blood. Like, I guess I'm just kind of curious where your mindset was on how good that blood was, or maybe what type of shot or impact you maybe thought you had, and like what your thought was on how recoverable this elk may be, or how far he thought he may go, or did you have any indication of any of that based on the arrow?
So the arrow had no bubbles on it, so I was like, well, that's already looking grim. It was kind of dark blood, so I was like, it looks like liver blood, but I don't. The way I saw the arrow, it looked like it was right in line with the crease. So I'm like, I hope it's not a brisket shot because that just wouldn't be good. I'm like, but I honestly have no idea because I didn't see the impact like I thought I did. So I was like, hopefully it's in the chest cavity. But I wasn't real confident on it. And I guess this would be a great time to talk about lighted knocks because this was the first archery shot on an animal in probably over a decade that I didn't have a lighted knock. So it was kind of funny because normally I would be, I don't know if you ever use them or not, but you're like, oh, I saw the shot. I saw the shot crystal clear because it's a lighted knock. And you just, you have a good idea of what happened. That wasn't the case with this one. So I don't know if I'm going to go back to them or not, but that would have been pretty cool for data in this case in particular.
Yeah. I think they're legal in Colorado now. Do you know for sure?
Yeah, the Colorado is good. I think Idaho you still can't, and I'm not sure about the other Western states, but I'm
Okay.
pretty sure I remember looking into it and being like, well, I could if I want to.
So did you not have them because you were trying to build a different type of arrow setup for elk versus what you shot with whitetail? What was the reason that you didn't have a lighted nock then?
Yeah, I just wanted to get some better arrow flight at distance. Whether it would give it to me or not, I'm not sure, but I was like, I'm not taking any chances with this.
Yeah. Did you change a lot about your arrow setup for elk? Like, did you go heavier in general, higher FOC, or did you just change? Like, was knock a minor change, or you kind of evaluated everything and changed other components of your arrow setup?
Yeah, so I actually built a new arrow for this hunt, which I'm just going to use for everything going forward. But I wanted a not a micro. I think it was a 5 millimeter arrow, which is a good deal thinner than what I've been running for the past ever, which is crazy. I have so much more penetration, like even on targets. Those
Yeah.
thinner arrows are just really awesome. So we'll get into where I hit the elk, but I actually did get a pass through. Like it was embedded in that piece of deadfall pretty good, which made me kind of happy because I'm only shooting 65 pounds. So I'm like, that's pretty impressive.
So you have light fading, decide to leave the elk. All you really have is your impression from the blood on the arrow. You're 3 weeks deep into this thing. That had been a long night to try and go back and just think
Oh,
through everything. And man, yeah, that being so low, like you can't process it with someone, and that had been a pretty a pretty long night.
oh, it was brutal. So when I got back to the truck, I actually called my folks because my dad has a lot of whitetail experience and he killed a cow elk in the past. So we just kind of talked about it. He seemed pretty optimistic. And then after I got off the phone, I actually looked up an outfitter in the area and I gave him a call because I just wanted a second opinion with from someone that has a lot of like elk experience. And this guy, he wasn't really able to give me much because he's like, I wasn't there. I don't know the whole situation, but he just gave me some pointers on how to track an elk that you don't have a solid idea of the shot. So I
Hmm.
was really appreciative because I basically called him in like a panic. I'm like, I just need to talk to someone that knows what they're doing.
What was some of the advice he gave you on tracking?
He was like, yeah, you can grid if you have to. I mean, I already knew that from whitetail, but he was like, check the creek, uh, just pointers like that. I guess things I might not have been thinking of clearly at the time, which actually was very helpful. because I did check the creek. Oh yeah, we'll get into all that.
Was it just I'm sure a somewhat restless night and then a early start, or did you take your time the next morning? What was your approach back to getting in there?
I might have slept maybe a few hours. Definitely not a good night's sleep. I was parked. I really wanted this parking spot in particular because someone had built some type of like a meat platform. So I saw it and I'm like, oh, I'm claiming this spot. But at the expense of that, I was like parked on a slope. So while I was trying to sleep, I kept sliding down in the back of the car, which was a nightmare. Not that I probably would have slept well anyway, but it wasn't a good recipe for sleep. And then I woke up at first light. I think I ate something quick. I didn't even make coffee that morning. That was the first. Then I just ran up to where I was and got on the search.
About how far from the truck was this?
So it was like, I think 800 yards as the crow flies, but that's never how it works in the mountains. I
Yeah.
think it was about a half mile each way.
Okay. So your plans to go back to the shot slash, arrow location and just try to find blood, and like that's the first plan.
Yeah, exactly. To which I did. So I was able to see where all four of his hooves dug in, like right when the shot broke. And then I followed his prints for maybe 10 yards. And then I found a little bit of blood. It was like a little drop on a leaf. And then I ended up tracking it to where he was when I bumped him. And I was like, oh, okay, there's a small pool of blood on both sides of his body. So I was like, okay, that's looking promising. And then I found another one similar to that, another 10 yards back. And I was like, okay, this is where I bumped him and he ran down and out of sight. So I did grid searching after I couldn't find tracks going down. I couldn't find blood going down. I tore that whole place apart below where I saw him go looking for him and I didn't find anything. But then I walked up a creek, which was maybe a couple hundred yards to the right, and I didn't find anything there. But what I did find was tracks, which were his tracks leading him to where I shot him at, which was neat.
Hmm.
So I was like, all right, he is going completely side hill. So then I went back up the first blood, just in a frustration, and I called my dad again. Somehow I had service throughout this whole day, which was amazing to me. But I talked to him for a little while. He got me pretty optimistic. He's like, yeah, just keep checking places out. And I'm like, all right, well, what I'm gonna do is I just tore apart below where I shot. Now I'm gonna move over some and basically do the same.
Hmm.
I'll hang up the phone and then I walk. It was like 40 or 50 yards. I walk over and then I just turn my head and down. It was like a dried up creek drainage, and he was just laying right in it, dead. And I'm like, you gotta be kidding me. I just spent 5 hours looking and this elk was 85 yards away the whole time.
That whole time you were kind of gritting below, it was like 5 hours.
Yeah, it was like
Dang.
first light to whatever's after that. It was like afternoon.
Wow.
Brutal. It was unbelievable. So as soon as I saw him, I just got right back on the horn and called my dad. And it was a really cool experience to walk up to my first bull on the phone with my dad.
Oh
It was
man.
crazy emotional, man. I didn't think I would get that emotional.
Yeah, I can only imagine it being emotional. I mean, the weeks you spent, the effort, and then the tracking, the questionable shot, like there's so much pent up into, is this ever going to happen? And then when you finally lay eyes on them, yeah, there's a big release of all that, I'm sure.
Oh, absolutely. It was that 24-hour period was just an absolute roller coaster.
Dang, man. That's so cool you were able to have service call your dad and almost like have him be part of that in a way.
Right. It was awesome. I never would have thought because a lot of these other places there was no service at all. It's like, yeah, I guess I'll send you an inReach message, but a phone call, that's just awesome.
Yeah. Realistically, going into this trip, your first time ever, like I'm talking the months before, years, months, days before this trip, like realistically, what did you think your chances were, slash, what were your expectations beforehand?
So I did not think I would be coming home with meat nor antlers. I was like, if I can get in the elk a couple times, get some experience, that would make me very happy. If I could hear some bugles, just have cool experience like that, like kind of experience the rut and learn a lot along the way, I'd be like, that is total success in my book. But I got almost none of those other things, but I came home with meat and antlers, which
Yeah, right. You got what you didn't think you were going to get, and you didn't get what you thought was more likely to get. Yeah,
wild.
that is wild. Well, man,
I want to touch back on something else before I forget.
absolutely.
So, if that was a more mature bull or a mature cow, I don't think I ever would have been able to get away with what I got away with.
Mm,
Because, like I said, I cow called like literally seconds before I saw him. So, if he had like more experience, he would have looked. I mean, he looked through me. But if he was more experienced, he would have been like, "There's no elk standing where I just heard an elk."
hmm
So I guess I got super lucky with having it be a younger bull.
Yeah,
I just found that pretty interesting.
yeah. I mean, it's yeah, it takes nothing away from all the effort you put into it to go. Yeah, I just kind of got lucky with a young bull because you worked your tail off. And did a lot of things right and stayed patient in that moment and was able to make the most of an opportunity that, as you said before, like you said it when you saw him and you're standing there essentially with your pants down, with your phone in your hand, your bow in the wrong hand, everything else, like it's a low odds proposition that you're gonna get a shot from that. And you did. And yeah, part of that may be a younger bull, but you still had to do a lot right to make that happen.
Oh yeah, like I always say that archery hunting, everything has to happen perfectly. This situation, for it to unfold, everything had to happen absolutely perfectly. And I still just can't believe it did. Like what he easily could have just walked a different direction, but
Hmm
on his own, without me doing anything, he just walked right where I needed him to.
Yeah.
Amazing.
That is amazing. So upon recovering them, and again, feel free to elaborate more if you want on what you're feeling, thinking, etc. I'm not trying to skip over that. I also just don't want to like make you try and relive every emotion or what have you. But one question I do have is, we talked about the shot, we talked about the blood, etc. Now that you obviously get to recover the elk, what was shot placement? What did that look like?
So it was low, just like I thought it was, but
Hmm
it was also, I want to call it maybe 6 inches back. So I think I hit liver. I think I hit the bottom of his liver,
Mm.
which I'm very glad that I let him sit overnight because that would have been a nightmare if I started tracking him right then and there. So yeah, I'm pretty sure that's what it was. His lungs and heart were fully intact. So I'm thinking it was liver.
I know it was, as you said, it was like a younger bull, but still, when you're even a young bull, when you're used to whitetail, seem quite big. So, what was it like just to look at the chore of, okay, great, I killed an elk, but now I'm solo. This is my first one, etc. Were you prepared for that, or were you feeling kind of overwhelmed by it?
I was actually looking forward to it because actually, at your advice from the podcast, every deer that me and my dad killed last year, I ended up doing the gutless method on. So I was pretty well versed in what I needed to do,
Nice.
just on a very larger scale.
Yeah. It's so helpful, man. I was saying like so glad that I started doing that before, I was just whitetail hunting and hadn't hunted elk yet to begin to understand that process.
And I won't do it any other way anymore. It's like, why would I allow the possibility for a mess when I
Yeah.
can completely avoid it?
Yeah.
So yeah, that's a very good idea, man. And I think a lot of people should probably try that.
Yeah. So you said it was essentially like a dry creek bed.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I guess that's why I wasn't able to see him because it dipped down a little bit.
Hmm. Do you have enough room to work on him fairly well in that spot?
Yeah, it was pretty good. And ideally there was even a like a little pine tree that was right behind his hindquarters, so I was able to like prop the legs up on it without
Oh,
using rope or anything. So that
perfect.
was super handy. But at the same token, another one of those little trees was blocking the entrance to like where the tenderloins are. So that was
Mm.
a very fun time getting it out.
How long do you think it took you to go from recovering them and making the first cut to, all right, we pretty much have this thing taken care of and I'm ready to start packing meat? I'm asking like in part for people who are, maybe new to this idea of elk hunting or solo. Like what type of time did that take you?
I think it was over 4 hours to get him ready to get back to the truck. It might have been
Okay.
even been five, I'm not sure. But I actually got it on GoPro. So I strapped my GoPro to a tree and threw on a time lapse. And I'm so grateful I did now because it's really cool to look back on.
Oh, that is cool, man. It's
I
very
was like,
cool.
all right, I knew it was worth lugging this thing around for 3 weeks just
Yeah.
for this situation.
Yeah, that's all the elk footage you have from 3 weeks, right?
Exactly. That's it. The battery died halfway through right after I was right at the point of rolling him over, and I really wanted to see myself struggle doing that alone. But
Yeah.
the
So you
battery
essentially
died
got
right.
the first half.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Any, as you said, you did the practice beforehand and doing whitetails gutless, but any other takeaways or things you learned on the elk, or it was just, as you said before, it was just like, okay, I've done this before. This is just a bigger version of it.
I honestly think it's easier on an elk because, especially like separating bones at joints, like there's just so much more room. Like
Hmm.
I think it's harder on whitetails because it's such a small space you have to hit. So
Hmm.
that surprised me because I thought it was going to be much more challenging compared to like a whitetail. Yeah, I didn't really find a good way to flip it over. That was the hardest part in
Yeah.
that whole process.
Like, as you said before, this wasn't, miles and miles and miles away from the truck, but it's still a solo elk pack out. How did that go? What was your physically, how were you mentally? What was that like? I mean, it's just a lot of work, no matter kind of how much the distance is. Like just packing one period is a lot of work solo.
Yeah, I was very fortunate that it wasn't like a really horrible pack out. It was actually looking at it, going into it, I was like, this shouldn't be too bad. Like I was like, I should be able to finish this today, which I was able to. But yeah, I was just fortunate. The training program you guys offer was very helpful. Meant to say something about that earlier in the podcast, but that was very, very helpful, and I'll be doing it again next year.
Yeah, it's such a unique story. I mean, very few guys get that amount of time. Very few guys have that type of experience, including the down. Like if you are going to have that much time and have that, you know, lack of encounter, lack of vocalization, but man, just you sticking it out in the way that it happened, right place at the right time. But that only happens by your persistence. So, yeah, it's such a unique. I don't know that I've heard a story quite like it, to be honest with you.
I thought it was very unique too, because I listen to a lot of elk stuff, do a lot of elk research. I don't think I've ever heard one like this. This is
Yeah.
different.
The listeners obviously haven't seen it, but when you first emailed me, you had some photos and stuff. And again, you're solo, so like your pictures are you setting up a camera and whatnot, obviously. But man, just there's certain photos where, you can see someone's happy and whatever, but for whatever reason, like as soon as I saw your photos, like you smiling with that bowl, that I mean, you can just see it in your face. Like this isn't just like me happy because I killed something. This is like there's a lot that went into this, and it's just like pure like joy, behind it. It's just super neat.
I was over the moon, smiles ear to ear.
Yeah. Heck yeah. So you said it was a long afternoon, but you did get that pack out wrapped up?
I did. I think I wrapped up at 10 or 11 o'clock at night. The first thing I wanted to do was get it off the ridge because maybe 500, no, a few hundred yards below where I found him, there was like a motorcycle trail. So I was like, all right, cool. If I can get him down to that motorcycle trail, then I don't mind doing this after dark because
Mm,
dark did come pretty quick.
hmm
But I was like, as long as I'm not tumbling down this ridge after dark, I think I'll be fine.
Yeah. No, that was a great move for sure.
Yeah, so I shuttled all the meat there down to the trail, and then I just took one load after another.
Nice, man.
That, oh man, that K4 pack is a dream with weight.
Did good.
It's a dream. So I had
Nice.
K3 before that, and
Uh-huh.
I just have a really small waist. So when K4 comes out, I'm like, oh, I think that'll fit me better because you have a a
Yeah.
size small like hip belt. And yeah, it performs, man. Very, very impressed.
Good. Good. What was so you're back at the truck that night, you're in Colorado, you're days travel from home. So I'm just curious, like very practically, what did you do with meat, both quote unquote immediately, like the next morning or what have you, but then also in terms of getting it home, what did that process look like for you?
So the first night, I knew it was going to get cold. It was actually 27 degrees when I woke up. So I let the meat sit on that like meat shelf thing that some person built who knows when. So the meat was very cold. And another thing I did, I cut down to the femur bone. I really wanted that meat to cool, and it did. It was cold to the touch the next morning. And then I put half in a Yeti 105 and the other half in another of the same. So it fit very well. And then I ran into town and got some dry ice, and I kept it on dry ice for, I guess, almost a week. And then when I was driving home, I stopped by my cousin's house and hung out with her for a little bit and threw the meat in her. They have like really big freezers. So I got a good freeze on it. And then I didn't use any more dry ice after that. I just threw them back in the coolers and drove it home.
What
And it
you
was
said,
almost thawed enough to start working on right when I got home. So it really did work out well.
yeah, you said it was on dry ice for almost a week and then you were kind of headed home. Did you stay out there to keep hunting or what was that week?
So I kind of recovered. I got a hotel room the next day, and then so actually, I was looking for somewhere to get a Euro done, and everywhere I called was like, "Oh yeah, it'll be like 6 to 8 weeks, and then you're gonna pay like $400 getting it shipped." So I'm like, "Okay, this is a nightmare." So I actually called that outfitter again, and I'm like, "Hey, do you know anyone that has like a quick turnaround on Euros?" And he sent me north a couple hours, and when I brought it in, and they're like, "Oh yeah, we can get it done by tomorrow morning." I'm like,
Seriously?
"What? What do you mean? Why does no one know about this service? I've never heard of such a service like that."
Huh. What was that place, if you don't mind sharing?
I think it was called Go West Taxidermy.
Okay.
I think her name was Ashley, and she was awesome. Yeah, I highly recommend that place if anyone's packing something home from Colorado.
Nice. What takeaways do you have on again, I know we kind of started with things like lessons learned, but anything that comes to mind we didn't hit, and then I just love to touch on, it's always good to touch on gear, things that either did or didn't work great. Anything you just didn't mention yet on, again, either
Yeah.
just lesson learns or takeaways on gear, etc.
I kind of forgot. I wanted to open with this, but I forgot. So 10 days out from this hunt, I took my bow to the bow shop because my peep rotated, and I bring it home and I draw my bow back. As soon as I hit the back wall, the bow exploded. My control cable snapped. So I'm looking down at my bow that bounced out of my hand with a broadhead sitting at my feet, and I'm like, oh boy, this is going to make things really interesting. And it did. So I bring it back to the bow shop, and my bow shop's awesome. Like, they looked at it, they're like, yeah, looks like the cable was routed incorrectly. So they actually replaced the cams, they replaced the string just because they're awesome. And then I was like, okay, now I have to shoot my butt off for the next week trying to break this string in while simultaneously tuning so I don't have my peep rotate while I'm out there, something crazy like that. So it was a very unique way to start a trip.
Yeah, I'd say that's wild. And that was from, it was just routed incorrectly?
Yeah, I'm not so sure exactly what that means, but they seemed to. So I was like, all right, as long as I leave this place with a bow that I can start breaking in.
Yeah. Dang. Yeah, that's wild.
It was unbelievable. I was like, this would only happen to me.
Uh, well, hopefully that was the extent of all your quote unquote like gear failures, but was there anything else good or bad, I guess, from the trip takeaways gear wise? I mean, it's just a lot of
Oh,
time to, a lot of guys go, oh yeah, I'm gonna go on my first elk hunt, and they, get 5, 7 days in the field, and you had plenty more time than that.
yeah. So I didn't end up breaking a Hilleberg or anything, but all my stuff really worked well. Like, I'm looking at my list here, and I didn't have anything really fail, and I don't count the bow as failing. That was just an interesting situation. But as far as stuff that did really good, obviously K4, blown away by it. I really, really liked the Sitka Mountain Evo jacket.
Oh
I
yeah.
had it on for most of the trip. It just worked out extremely well. Big, big fan of that. Uh, the Argali knife, that thing I didn't have to touch up, which was awesome. It just
Hmm.
plowed through that entire elk. It's really cool to have just some good steel. Because when
Yeah.
I was younger, I always used like cheaper quality steels, and they would just get really dulled up fast. So that's a very valuable piece
Yeah.
to me.
Yeah. It's a great knife.
Uh, Trekking poles are a move. That is just a game changer for packing out an animal. I think I
Hmm.
only used them maybe twice before that, but in those cases where they're particularly useful, they're worth their weight in gold.
Yeah.
Like getting down deadfall and stuff like that. Strap the bow to the pack and get the poles out because I'm not
Yeah.
breaking my ankles today. I think as far as gear goes, I think that's about it. Amazingly, nothing, I didn't break anything.
Well, man, thanks for taking the time to share the story. As I said, when I got the email from you, I like you shared some things, and then there's other things where I'm like, wait, what? Like he was out there all month, and he sounds like he didn't have much action in 3 weeks. Like I just knew I had to hear more, and personally wanted to hear more, but also this is a great story to share with listeners, and just another perfect example of persistence. And it's not always going to work out, like when you're persistent, but you also just can't. You just got to hunt till the end. If you have a week to hunt, if you have 3 weeks to hunt, if you have 3 days to hunt, you just got to make the most of what you have and stay persistent. And you never know what can happen. And your story is a perfect example of that.
Absolutely, man. You can't kill them from home. You just have to be out there.
Yeah.
I have a question for you before we go. So every time I end up like quartering an animal, I always get hair all over the meat. Am I
Mhm.
doing something wrong, or is there a good technique to minimize that? Because hair just gets everywhere. Like I'm like,
Mhm.
how do I got hair from the elk's mane on a hind quarter? It's just like this doesn't even make sense.
Yeah. I do think it's tougher when you're solo just because you have like less hands. There's several things to that. It could be partially be cutting, like cutting with the grain of the hair, the way the hair is laying, is going to help keep hair from like popping up. So if you're cutting, if you're pushing the hair up and making it want to stand up as you cut, it's also going to pop more hair off. So just following the path of the hair, if you will, and the way that the hair is laying and cutting it in that direction is helpful. And then I try to, I try to get as much hide off as possible and like lay it back and far out away from the meat. So instead of saying just like, okay, I'm gonna work on just the front shoulder, I'm gonna start with just the back straps or whatever. Instead of just working in that area, I'm gonna try to, and this, depends on how the animal's laying and if I have help, etc. But I'm gonna try to like skin that whole side or as much of that side as I can first and get it laid back and out of the way. And then, kind of start to take off meat. So that can be helpful too. And then there are times where it's like tricky, especially solo, where you need to move something a certain way. And maybe that causes it to lay on hair of a different part or what have you. So just obviously trying to minimize that contact. But I think a lot of it comes to the direction you're cutting at times, and then also just trying to give yourself as much clearance, for lack of better terms, like skin away as much hide as you can, and then start working on meat, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'll try that out on some whitetails here soon.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, there's times where, hair gets on stuff. And I feel like I've had animals that for whatever reason tend to, more hairs coming off than others. So I think there could be multiple factors. That's a good question, though.
I like keeping the meat clean.
Yeah, yeah, and
I've been
that's
butchering this thing at home the past 3 days, and the first step is always just, all right, bring it to the sink and try to rinse off all this hair.
yeah, and two, I think with you, like it depends what you do with it, obviously afterwards. But did you keep it in game bags when you had it in the cooler?
I did.
Yeah, okay, yeah, because I was definitely have had times where I've taken meat out of game bags, but then it's been on ice and things like that. And then you start to get a little bit of melt and then hair's floating around and hair's, getting on areas because it, is free at that point and has contact versus not being in a game bag. But
Yeah, I
yeah,
really
that's a
didn't
good
feel like
question.
dealing with that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Keeping it in the game bags was the right call.
Yeah. Good. Well, thanks for sharing, man. I bet you're hooked and excited to still get out and get those experiences you didn't get, like get the bugles and get the encounters and stuff like that.
Oh, absolutely. I'll most definitely be out next year. I just don't know where yet.
Well, there you have it, guys. A unique story for sure. Quite a memorable one for Graydon. I so admire his persistence and dedication to sticking it out during what obviously was a very tough hunt at times. It takes a lot to stick through hunting when things aren't going your way, when animals seem to be completely elusive. So kudos to him, and I hope that if nothing else, it inspires you to stay more persistent on your future hunts when things seemingly aren't coming together. As always, if you're enjoying the show, it would help us tremendously if you can leave a rating or review in whatever podcast app that you're using. And if you haven't yet subscribed to the show, be sure to hit subscribe or follow in the podcast app or go to exomountgear.com/podcast to learn more. And finally, you can always contact us with any questions, suggestions, or any other feedback you have by sending an email to podcast@exomountgear.com. We'll talk to you soon.